Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to another NMRAx. We've got three different clinic presenters here today to enlighten you and entertain you. First up, we've got Lloyd, but before that, we'll have a mention of a few things we got coming up in the NMRA in the next, the next 3 or 4 months. We've got our convention coming up shortly in Long Beach. So I'll have to have a talk with a few of the crew and see who's going to Long Beach, and we'll have a mention of that. But first of all, we're going to travel all the way to the frozen tundra of Canada to meet with our friend Lloyd, who's going to tell us all about water today. And I think it's going to be in its three states: in steam, in liquid, and most commonly, I think, around his area in a solid form called ice. But anyway, uh, continuing his regular series on scenery, I'd like to hand it over to Lloyd. Take it away.
Thank, thank you, Marty. By the way, today was 22, so it was a very warm
22.
day. Yeah, there's
That'd
no
be
more
a
snow.
that'd be a
No
heat
more.
wave with you, wouldn't it? You'd be out in shorts and t-shirt
Soon, soon.
soon, soon.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not. It's 22 Celsius, not 22 Fahrenheit.
well, it's starting to get cold here now because I've had to turn the air conditioning off, and I can actually open the door during the day. So we know we're heading towards winter. It'll be freezing here soon. It'll probably be around about, or I'd say 18 degrees. It's looking outside. It says it's 14 at the moment at here. So that'll be a bit chilly outside for me. But anyway, I've been to
Yeah,
Springfield and I know it gets a lot colder.
we're just switching places, right?
Yeah, we're
You're
just
just
swapping over. Yep,
yeah,
yep,
yeah.
yep.
Okay, so let's start um, by by sharing. So we're going to be, this is what I call my pillar number 3 out of 6. We've done mountains, we've done grass, now we're doing water. Um, Basically, it's to look at different ways of making water. Um, we've got the easy one, which is basically just painting, but you need to add probably some gloss, some acrylic gloss or Mod Podge or some resin to make it look like clear, but some people will just use paint and cover it with varnish. Then you've got the acrylic glossy gel. Um, by the way, this presentation was done at our division, St. Lawrence division. And we had three other clinicians that talked about water. We had Bob Farquhart, who talked about acrylic glossy. We had Chris Helen, who spoke about Mod Podge. And then we had Malcolm Bent that spoke about the water surfaces or anything extra. So we're going to go through all of these, and I'll be presenting what the other presenters were presenting. So the first one is just basically paint. You have to be like kind of an artist to be able to blend the different colors of paint. And if you're like me, I started with a big area, and by the time I got to blending, well, the paint was already dry, so that didn't work too well. So with paint, you use a light colored paint from the edge to a darker shade to the middle, and then you blend the two different colors. So it's easier to start with small areas. And then once dry, then you could apply a glossy varnish or a Mod Podge or gel to give it the like the glossy look. And if you want to give it more coats, you can do that too, depending on if you want to do waves or like small waves or big waves. And the cost of doing so in this example is about 15 cents a square foot, which is basically the paint. And by the way, when I say 15 cents, this is Canadian money. So we're probably talking about 10 cents American. Then we're going to talk about gel. Um, I'll explain a little bit later what we did. This was an example. We had four examples of ways of doing it. So the gel, again, we use a light colored paint from the edge to a darker shade in the middle and blend the different colors. Once dry, apply a medium or a heavy gel and repeat if necessary. Depending on the thickness, calculate many days to completely dry. When I tried it, I did bigger waves than normal, and it took about a week to dry. I mean, not the top part, but inside you could see the whitish color of the gel. And by the time it really became clear, it was a week long. So do it in small layers. So it costs about 55 cents a square foot for the paint and the gel. The gel was Liquitex, if I'm not wrong. Mod Podge, it's it's not a very thick, um, but again, this to sorry, the way of doing it is the same, where you put light colored paint to dark, you blend the colors, but once dry, you apply the glossy Mod Podge. It makes it look really glossy, but the more coats you put, the for creating, like I said, the creating waves, um, it really makes a difference. And again, depending on the number of layers, calculate many days to completely dry. And the cost is about 25 cents a square foot for the paint and the Mod Podge. But make sure it is the glossy Mod Podge, not the matte. There's also the plexiglass. Um, that's it's a little bit harder to do if you're doing a big lake or if you're doing rivers with rapids. But um, it's a not necessarily a cheap way, but it's also an easy way of doing it. Again, it's the same basic light colored paint to dark, and of course blending the colors. Once you once the paint is completely dry, then you cover the area with a piece of plexiglass, about a 1/16, um, and you and you glue it with hot glue directly on the, like leaving a gap between what you've painted to create some type of dimension if you want. Then you cover the plexiglass with a coat of Mod Podge or gel to create the waves. So the cost is about 225 a square foot for the paint, the Mod Podge, and the plexiglass. It's a little bit more expensive. Then you've got the resin epoxy. Um, this one is there's plenty out there. You could get some from Woodland Scenics, or just like buying epoxy and resin with a hardener, where um, you mix them together. So again, about the painting, but what you got to do is make sure the area is fully leak proof. Um, I think most of us have got the problem of having leaks, so it's very important that it's totally leak proof and clean. Now, somebody was mentioning about not using styrofoam. You can use styrofoam as a base, but it has to be fully um, covered. Usually, you'd cover it with scalpel mold or plaster. Paint won't be enough, because if you miss a spot, you're gonna have problems with the resin. It could create, it will create a reaction between the styrofoam and your resin. So you make sure it's fully covered. Um, that you, I know that I tried putting a coat of glue all over, but that wasn't enough either. So scalpel mold was my source, my go-to. Um, so what you have to do is take the two bottles, or one, like I said, one is the epoxy, the other one is a hardener, and it's usually 50-50. Um, a good mix, you got to mix it really good. And once you pour it, it will create bubbles, and that you have to remove. You could do that with a blowtorch, or you could blow through a straw. But if you have a big area, you might run out of breath. So they sell those small torches. Um, just make sure that you haven't done your static grass before, or you don't have any stuff that could burn around. And once you've done so, then cover it to dry. You don't want any dust or any particles falling over it. Um, Once it's done and it's dry, usually give it 24 hours. It will dry before that, but the bottom part might not be fully dried. So give it a chance to have it completely dry. Uh, Sorry. Um, so the cost is about $50 a square foot for paint, and that's based on a thickness of about half an inch of resin. Um, I know that Woodland Scenics water, you can only pour 1/8 of an inch at a time, because the more, if you pour more than that, you're going to have shrinkage, cracking, and you're going to have to restart. While the epoxy resin, you could go up to, if I'm not wrong, 2 inches deep, but I don't think you need 2 inches. Um, the other thing too with resin is you could leave it clear, or you could put a drop of, I I put acrylic paint, uh, but a drop at a time, because uh, you can't go backwards. So basically the four types here, you've got Mod Podge at 25 cents a square foot, acrylic gel 55 cents a square foot, plexiglass at 225 square foot, and resin $50 a square foot. Resin is the most expensive. Um, so um, it's so basically it's based on what when you're doing water, it's based on what you can afford, and it's also the time consuming. If you're doing epoxy, you got to let it um, dry for, let's say, a day, while Mod Podge, it dries pretty fast. Now, when it comes to waterfalls or rapids, um, use a gel or clear caulking or water effects from Woodland Scenics. What you do is make strips on a piece of wax paper, and once dry, remove it and install it on the scene. The cost is about $17 a square foot for water effects. Um, when you're doing a river, like especially rapids, if you have different levels of your river, you can pour epoxy on the different levels and finish with a gel in between the levels, so to create some type of rapids, or and also around the rocks. So this part here was by Chris Helen. We talked about using Mod Podge, modeling water with Mod Podge. So what is Mod Podge? Well, it's polyvinyl acetate. It's, you could have matte, gloss, gloss medium. You could, wood glue is also polyvinyl acetate, white glue, etc. But Mod Podge is just a cheaper brand. Um, it is non-toxic. It's, you can clean it with soap and water. It dries fast, dries clear, and can be tinted with acrylic paint. Water resistance once dry and inexpensive. But of course, if you're going to add, you can add water to the Mod Podge, but then you're removing the gloss, your Mod Podge will become more matte. So how is it used to model water? So it provides a glossy coating, like a wet look, and can be stippled to provide surface texture. Example, to add ripples or wavelets to replace the perfectly flat surface of plexiglass or poured epoxy water models. Uh, it doesn't add depth because you won't be able to see right through. Um, it's a coarser texture possible by using acrylic gloss gel. The difference between the two, between a gloss gel and um, uh, Mod Podge, Mod Podge is more liquid. So at one point it just flattens out, while the gel really stays as you put it. So you got to prepare your surface, level, smooth. Example, eliminate wood grains. And like I said, can add ripple textures at this stage if desired. Uh, and use colors to stimulate depth. The depth you could do prior, you could paint it before. Um, I, it, um, when you're putting the Mod Podge, you don't have to. You could do 2, 3, 4 layers of Mod Podge, or you could just do one and just create your waves um, right away. This was his daughter working on a little diorama for school. You can see like she's blending the colors. And this is after putting Mod Podge, where the first coat was applied with a big paintbrush, and then he came back and did the waves. So you apply gloss medium, the entire surface with a large brush. Let stand for about 10 minutes. Gently stipple with a stiff brush to create ripples, or use compressed air 6 to 8 inches from the surface to simulate wind. Um, it will shrink slightly as it dries, and texture will become more subtle. Here she was working on the river, um, painting the river with different colors, and then they applied the Mod Podge. You can see the ripples, and then came back and added more Mod Podge um, to his liking. So as you can see, it comes out white, but once it dries, it comes out clear. So caution, use thin coat. Example, don't pour it. Thick coat may crack while drying. Use gentle strokes when applying and stippling to avoid creating air bubbles. If you do get air bubbles, using oh yeah, air gun to kind of blow your Mod Podge, that could eliminate the bubbles. And it can be thin with water, but like I said, will diminish gloss. So this was the final result. As you can see, Mod Podge, depending on the color of the paint that you're going to put underneath, will create some type of depth to your scenery. And again, here he dry brushed some white paint over the Mod Podge, the ripples of the Mod Podge. And again, now modeling water with acrylic glossy gel. This was Bob Farquhar. these are the types, what's available. You could do it with hot glue, fiberglass strands covered with Envirotex, silicone sealant, acrylic gloss gel, 6000 glue and sealant, and Mod Podge. Now, some will turn yellow with time, depending on the thickness or the color of the paint you have in the back of it. When applying Mod Podge, this is what it looks like. So you can create big waves, and it will dry that way. But the thicker it is, like I said, the longer it will take to dry. Here's another example of before it dries. So what kind of products are available? Like I've said before, we've got Liquitex, Mod Podge, then you've got Envirotex, you got casting resin, you got realistic water, and easy water. Realistic water is the one that I was talking about, where you can put about 1/8 of an inch at a time. Casting resin is the mix with the resin and the hardener. Envirotex is about the same. It's the same thing. Easy water, I think that's the one that you, if I'm not wrong, you have to boil. I never used it, but I can't remember what he talked about. But if I'm not wrong, those are the beads that do melt. So those are the products that you could use for, again, for making water. So the first method we're going to look at is using latex caulking. Especially if you're doing falls or rapids, you lay out some plastic wrap, and then you lay caulk in rows, approximate length of the waterfalls needed. And using cardboard or paper, pull the caulking from the top to bottom, and then wait 10-15 minutes for caulking to set. And you could give it a second layer if you want it thicker, or you do thin layers and you could put 2 or 3 layers together. Now remove the dry caulk from the saran wrap, and you can see the one on the right is thin, the two on the left are thicker. The thin one, you've got a better chance of having it clear. So if you want to see the back of your waterfall, if you want to see the rock work that you've done, I would go with the thin layer. Now, try not to roll the silicone off the plastic wrap, as the silicone will stick to itself. It's still very sticky though. And then you dry brush with some white paint. Second method is using gloss medium gel. So you put a blob of medium on a stick and plop it on the paper backing. You could also use wax paper. The reason that he used a paper backing is that when he was able to remove it, there's little fibers of paper that's stuck in the back to give it a little bit more of a texture. Using the stick, smooth out the medium to the length of the waterfall. Then after, let it dry for just a few minutes. And using the stick, dry through the medium, making lines. Do this lightly. Keep doing this until you're satisfied with the shape. You could always come back and give it a second coat where, let's say, where you've missed. Once it has dry, cut away the excess backing paper. and water out of the culvert using a piece of caulking. Like I said, see, like it looks, you've got dirt coming out of the pipe, but on a wax paper, it will be totally clear. Then we go into modeling water surface effects. Once you've created your nice glass smooth surface of water using your choice of resin or other products, you might want to make waves, or at least ripples. Rarely is water perfectly still. Either the current or the wind creates pattern on the surface, from small ripples to waves. There are several specific products from Woodland Scenics and Vallejo to create surface effects, but you can also use gloss medium and varnish, gloss medium gel, gloss medium heavy gel, or gloss Mod Podge. Each has their own use. I know that the heavy gel, this one is very thick, and you're basically sculpting your gel to what you want it to look like. So the gloss medium and varnish is useful for making small wet areas like puddles and creeks with no depth. It can also be used as a top coat over deep resin pores to provide some surface effects. Um, he didn't find it as effective as gloss Mod Podge, but this since is runnier and you have to wait until it sets a bit before surface effects will stay in place. Um, yeah, the more liquid it is, the, the harder it is to get real nice ripples. Um, for the left example, the medium was left to set a bit. Sorry, I can't read what because it's at the bottom of the screen. Um, the medium was blown. Oh yeah, he used um, no, gee, a straw to blow. It's just that when you're doing a big area, it's not always the best thing. Gloss medium gel and gloss medium heavy gel are good for more dramatic waves effect. Usually the ordinary gel works well enough. A thick layer of heavy gel can take a day to set completely and turn clear. So an example with gel, um, this gel goes on white and dries clear. Stipple with the aid of a brush, it makes good choppy waves. Like I said, if you look at the picture from the middle, um, it will dry fast. I mean, it'll inside a day it's dry, but then you'll see a lot of the white still not dry. Even though you pass your finger over it, I mean, you can feel it's hard. But for the white to completely disappear, it'll probably take a few days. So gloss medium gel can also be used effectively to make running water in creeks and rapids. Once the gel has dried, some careful application of white paint to the ripples can enhance the rapid effect. Here's a gentle stream example. So, like I said, not the heavy gel, but the medium gel. The fact that you're able to sculpt, let's say from the rocks down, uh, you can create splashes, and it will dry that way. This is a gentle stream example. White paint has been added to enhance the gentle rapids. The dry brushing with the white paint also, and like it does enhance the flow of the water, and like around the rocks especially. Here's a gentle wind surface effect with gel and a spatula. So it doesn't take that much gel to create um, a good surface. Now, of course, you won't see the bottom of your stream or the bottom of the lake, Um, but that's up to you to decide what kind of um, what kind of color you want your lake to be. Like for example, around where I live, the water's totally brown. It's a light brown, but there's no way you will be able to see the bottom. So maybe 4 or 5 dashes of brown paint was enough to give it the color I wanted. Or I there's another one. There was a like a pond which was like kind of green, dark green, and again you couldn't see the bottom. But doing those waves, yeah, those little windy waves, if you want, makes a difference. So here are some examples of the use of gel and gloss medium. These are from a book by a master military modeler, Per Olav Lund. A WW1 German aircraft has ditch in the sea, as you can see on the right. Um, Much like we have done, the basic shape was made with styrofoam, and then scalpel mold was used to create like the base, and um, and then the gel was added. The foamy area was created by adding white acrylic gel, stippled vertically with a brush. Then it was covered with valuable still water to get the gloss. Using gloss clear gel medium painted white would probably also work. The crash and wave edge was formed with a kitchen sponge and gel. He's found that gloss Mod Podge is better than gloss medium and varnish for creating subtle surface effects. It's thicker to start with and sets up fairly fast so that it keeps the surface effect without self-leveling it out. So here was laid on a thick level coat and then stippled with the flat side of half-inch white brush. He was doing all those tests with plexiglass to see different shapes and results using all the um, available products. Some other effects made with gloss, Mod Podge, and a brush. But you can see compared to the gel, it's not as thick as gel would be because the Mod Podge is more runny. Here are some small waves, such as might be found on a river or lake. It started with a leveled out covering of gloss Mod Podge, which was then lightly blown upon with a soda straw to form waves. This is an early attempt, but most of these effects practice makes perfect. Uh, I know that during our clinic, the hands-on portion, people were all blowing through straws and trying to create um, like the perfect wave. Um, it was fun. Here are gentle ripples on a stream with old railway pilings. That reminds me, epoxy or has a tendency to go up whatever you've got sticking out of the water. So that's something you have to be careful of. They also added underwater effects with bits of plants material used to represent roots. Banks and shorelines will eventually have bulrushes and lily pads. One of the That's because everybody who participated in the clinic, we had a hands-on clinic which lasted about 3 hours, and people had to get people more involved. Everybody was building a diorama, and that's what he was doing with his water here. Um, Streams. Uh, Basically, this was the hands-on clinic for the afternoon. So this is a presentation of how people were going to do the clinic. So everybody had a piece of styrofoam So they had to carve the piece of styrofoam for a stream in a rectangular form, not like this picture, but like rectangular because we were going to use a plexiglass. Um, then it was cleaned with a metal brush and using a mixture of 50-50 water, white glue, and we dabbed the whole area, including the banks, and we inserted a piece of tissue and dabbed more glue mixture with a paintbrush. So it kind of gave the ripple effect with uh, the we're using toilet paper. Um, and we repeated that layer four or five times by always dabbing and pushing with the paintbrush. So some created bigger ripples. So everybody was doing this. Um, and while it's wet, start painting from the middle with a dark color. Add a lighter color on both sides of the darker area. And since the area is wet, mix the colors by blending them. It was much easier because everything was wet and the paint just kind of was flown like in in each other. So it was easier to blend. Um, at this point, if adding Mod Podge, gel, or resin, let it dry. Um, but today we will install a plexiglass on top. So if if you want to use, yeah, so it's very important that if you're going to use Mod Podge, gel, or resin, that it is completely dry, especially resin, because the fact that it's humid, it's wet, the resin does not like humidity. Like the top part might be dry, but the bottom won't be dry. It'll still be wet, still be runny. So you got to make sure that it's totally dry. And if you're using Mod Podge or gel, well, you're just going to blend it with the paint. So you got to wait till it's totally dry. Now, put dabs of hot glue on the four corners, install the plexiglass on top. But do not install the plexiglass on the paint because then you're going to smear it all. And because they were doing that in the afternoon, um, the paint didn't have time to dry. So by putting dabs of hot glue, the plexiglass was not touching the paint. Uh, Once this was done, they used Mod Podge or gel to create a surface with moving water. And again, they were told, be careful not to make bubbles. Uh, then they created a muddy bank, mixed dirt with white glue, and add a little water to reach a very pasty mud. Put the muddy paste on both edge of the plexiglass, creating a wavy bank. While it's drying, use a spatula to lift the paste, giving it texture. If the Mod Podge is dry, use white paint and dry brush it in the elevated parts of the water surface. So that was the entire project for the afternoon. Um, and everybody was participating and it, it looked really good. Picture doesn't always give a good result, but live it was great. We didn't have time to do the grass. The people they did it at home. As you can see, some of the members were carving. Um, they were supposed to carve in a rectangular way, but it was corrected afterwards. Um, this is when they were putting the tissues with the white glue mixed with water, creating different, like I said, different layers. Yeah, and using Mod Podge, blowing the Mod Podge to create the waves. And then the following month, people brought in their work that they did on their diorama. So this was an example here where there was like, it was a pond. Another one here was a stream. It wasn't completely finished. There's water coming from the right and flowing downwards to the water. Here's another one. With the rock work, he was going to use gel uh, because it was mainly going downwards. Um, that's something you can't do with resin. Um, so gel was much better. As you can see, like we've done the um, the mountains, we've done the grass, and now we're doing water. And the following month, we were going to do trees. So everybody, to get everybody motivated, so everybody was building a diorama about 16 by 24 to incorporate everything that we were going to teach during those 6 clinics. So the next one was going to be trees because there's so many types of trees to be that could be done. Then we were going to follow it with roads, and the last one, details. Um, today was at our division meeting. Today was the last one. It was all about details. So I think that's it for water. Um, our next clinic on NMRAx is June 29th, and we're going to talk about trees, a bunch of trees. It's going to be the presentation that we gave at our division. Since we're from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, um, it probably won't be the same type of trees that, let's say, California or Arizona, but the idea will be pretty much the same.
Excellent.
And that's it.
Excellent. Excellent. That was a quite an interesting presentation there on different water effects. I noticed in a few of them, you've mentioned a few methods I've seen done over here. Um, I know when you use the commercial products, I had a bit of a story about a friend of mine who did a rather large lake using the Woodlands Easy Water, except with the humidity and the heat we get in Queensland, it expands quite a bit. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, he heard this explosion come from the train room, like a gas main had gone off. And when he went in there, the lake had exploded, and there were shards of easy water all over the train room. And for about the next 6 months, every time we'd have an op session in there, where we'd find something that stopped working because there's a shard of easy water jammed in there. So yeah, with the humidity and the heat here, that didn't used to work that well. But
Well, my first try with the epoxy resin, um, I just did a small lake under my covered bridge, and everything looked nice until I got downstairs the next morning and there was no more water in my lake. It had dripped all over the floor.
oh dear.
That's that was a no-no. Yeah, so
I
things
noticed
happen.
one of the nicest water effects I think I ever saw was a modeler in Australia by the name of Jeff Knott. Now, there's a blatant push here for the NMRA History of Scale Model Railroading exhibit at the California State Rail Museum. When you roll up there, the first layout you see when you walk in is Smuggler's Cove, which is an England layout based on New England on the waterfront there. And the ocean and the lapping waves really got me. And I said to Jeff, I said, how did you get the peaks and the troughs in the waves there? And one of the tricks he used to do was use just standard house paint, but put it in the fridge for about 2 or 3 days beforehand, and the house paint would turn to like a gel. He said it was all worked out well until one day one of his kids came in and asked what that funny yogurt was that was in the fridge. So he said the only other thing he recommended is make sure you label the container. So yes, but all those different types that you had there, Lloyd. What's your favourite type of method of doing water?
Um, Personally, I'll go with the resin because most of the water around here is dark. Uh, you won't see the bottom, so I don't have to put in like to put an inch or half an inch. I could go a quarter of an inch. It's
Yes,
just that my water is um, um like putting dabs of acrylic paint, just finding the right color is plenty. I mean, you don't have to go big. Um, I had a bad experience with the Woodland Scenic one. Um, it, wa- Everything was cracked and shrunk, and I said,
right.
okay, and that's because I didn't read on the bottle. It said an eighth of an inch instead of an inch.
Yes,
Um, when we did the plexiglass during the clinic, I was surprised how how it really turns out. If you got some really nice clear plexiglass, um, you got something really nice. You don't have to like you could have, let's say, a quarter of an inch or a half an inch between, and you could put stuff in rocks, and you will be able to see that the bottom of your river.
yes, yeah. It's
But yeah,
amazing with
yeah.
some of the effects that you can have with water. I've been watching a few of the scale military modelers, and when they do ships or even some of them
Oh,
when they've done a submarine that's been say damaged by a depth charge or something, and they'll do it in a nearly a 1 foot square slab of epoxy that they pour basically or resin that they pour, and they tend to pour the whole thing in one foul swoop. And
yeah, but that's a special epoxy. Well, not a special epoxy, but when you're pouring more than 2 inches, then you go to a different epoxy where the mix is totally different.
right,
So instead of being 1 to 1, it's probably 2 to 1. I don't know exactly,
yes,
but it's a different mix. Yeah.
yeah, because some of those dioramas or models they make of those type of scenes are quite spectacular, especially with the lighting effects that they put in there as well. Let's have a
Well,
little look. Uh, yeah,
I was gonna say, like, um, there's so many examples on YouTube that you can look at. I think of Luke Townend, for example, or oh, can't remember his name. Those people, like, they really explain how to do it, especially with resin.
yes,
Um, then I can't remember who did one with gel. It was like a like a fishing area
yes,
where the waves were, it was beautiful. Or you have Boomer Diorama that did just paint, and I think he used Mod Podge. That's it. So there's different ways. Uh, Depends on how much you're willing to pay, how much time you want to spend,
yes.
and how many problems you might want to face when things go wrong.
Yeah. Oh dear. So I'll have a look over here. The elves have been sorting through the chat and put some questions up in the on the screen here. So we'll have a look at a few of those. Um, it says like myself, you've enjoyed going out on a few cruises and you've travelled over a fair bit of water. A lot of people paint water blue, but but water isn't blue. I've never seen a blue hunk of water. It's usually a lot different colours. What colours are your preference for doing
Uh,
water?
Water is clear. It's everything that's underneath that gives, like, for example, when you go on a cruise and the water looks like turquoise. It looks very nice, but it's really clear. It's the corals, the the way the sun shines in the water that will give you different colors.
Yes.
When I look at the pond near where I live, if I was to take a glass of water, it's not brown. It's
Yes.
clear. Uh, it's the sand at the bottom, or yeah. So it depends what color you want, but yeah, water is not blue.
No.
If you're doing a little stream with rapids, then you might have it clear because it's not deep enough.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So um,
Well, I guess
yeah,
that leads on to next questions and the I guess the material and the way you do it and whether you're going to be colouring is going to depend on how deep the water is. If you're trying to do an ocean scene or something like that, well, you'll probably have a painted surface, but if you're uh, if you're doing a creek or something small. I plan to do a small creek on the layout here. I can hear the production staff in the background of NMRAx falling off their chairs laughing at the moment. But yes, I do have a creek planned in here, and I think it's going to have a collection of mini prints, shopping carts in the bottom of it, and garbage and bits and pieces. So yeah, so,
uh,
going on from that colours question, do you ever stain the water mediums that you use before you use them, or do you paint on top of them, or
no, the water I use, well, like I said, I use resin, epoxy resin, and I'll do the mix, and then I'll take my acrylic paint and just put one drop mix, and usually it's still you can almost see through, but like for example, it will be a very light brown, but I can see through the mix. Then I'll add another drop, and until I get the right color that I'm looking for. But yeah, you got the first time I think I was doing can't remember what, yeah, it must have been another brown. And I think I put like 6, 7 drops, and it was totally brown. I mean, no,
yeah,
it didn't look right.
yeah,
So but if you're gonna cover rocks and you're gonna put little fish in there, um, no, I would go with probably 1 or 2 drops of the color that you want.
okay,
But definitely not turquoise.
yes, yeah, yeah. Another one of the questions I got here says, can you add or can you mix mediums to get additional effects? And if you do, how long should you wait between applications?
Well, I know that I used Mod Podge to create not waves, but like let's say a windy day, you'll have just small ripples on the water. That I'll use Mod Podge. But if I want, um, uh, for example, near rocks, I'm gonna want to put some gel to make it like a little splash. I'll wait till it's totally dry, and then I'll do the gel. I just don't want to take a chance that um, I'll screw up or something. So one shot, one thing at a time.
So you'll give it a couple of days between
Yeah.
to
Well,
cure.
Mod Podge will dry. I'd say, oh, I was gonna say an hour or two. It's dry. I mean, a very thin layer. It dries pretty fast. So 2, 3 hours later, I could put the gel, but then the gel I'll probably have to wait a full day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question that we had here was, do you have any ideas on how you could attempt doing breaking waves at the ocean, or have you seen any examples of breaking surf? Like I said, if you go to another shameless plug, if you go to the NMRA Museum at the Cal State Rail Museum, you'll see it on Smuggler's Cove. There is some breaking waves there. But
That's
what do you
usually that's usually used with gel. Uh, Medium gel could do it, but I would go with the heavy gel. You could really carve the way you want the wave to break.
Yes.
and wait for it to dry a bit, and you could add more, especially if you want the curve. Like you can start with the curve and then add a little bit more and add a little bit more for like um, a bigger break. But yeah, you can't do that. Uh, I wouldn't do that in one shot. I would
Yes.
take my time and get it right.
Oh, being you're our scenery guru, I think you might have to have a bit of a play around with that and see what you can come up with.
Well, everything needs, I'd say the best way is to test.
Yep.
If you're going to use epoxy, use two little cups, mix them together, add a drop of paint, and see if this is what you like.
Yes. Yep.
Same thing with the gel, do it somewhere else. I remember the first time I used Mod Podge, I used matte, and when I looked at it, it looked terrible. But then I saw a video that said you could use like white glue. Yeah, but white glue is matte, so I was able to just remove it. Like it came off really good.
Well,
So yeah, you
I
gotta test.
must stop you here. I see someone's typing furiously in my little tally type here, saying that we're up, where time is up, and we've got to move on. Lloyd, thanks
Okay,
a million for that. That was really informative and entertaining.
I'll
And
see you in
we'll
June.
look forward to your next sojourn into the world of trees. And before I get into any more trouble by the production staff here, who I think Speed's probably pulling his hair out in the bottom of the helix by now, so I'll wrap it up and I'll say thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Okay, take care.
Welcome back to another NMRAx episode. Martin said in the previous one, I'm pulling my hair, but there's none left. So he already lost those in the previous NMRAx round. Our next presenter, with an update on photo interpretation for model makers, lives in Moncton, New Brunswick, and serves as AP chair, a board member, and coordinator for the monthly third Thursday seminar series for the Eastern Canada division of the Northeastern region. His primary modeling interest is centered on the Canadian National Railways, and he enjoys building rolling stock and structures from scratch and kits. He has been an NMRA member since 1997 and holds the still under warranty MMR number 720. Please welcome Mr. James Whatley.
Thank you for the introduction, Speed. Um, Basically tonight I'm going to be talking on photo interpretation. This presentation is an update of one I did a year ago for NERX, and I've included a lot more material on some computer-based techniques that are fairly easy to do and hopefully will be useful to the audience. So here it goes. So in our travels, model makers frequently notice interesting subjects we would like to construct. Often, blueprints or published drawings simply do not exist. Working from photographs may be our only choice. This presentation covers some useful tips and methods to help you interpret photos for model making. Now, the field of programmetry, commonly referred to as photo interpretation, is defined by Wikipedia as the science and technology of obtaining reliable information about physical objects and the environment through the process of recording, measuring, and interpreting photographic images and patterns of electromagnetic radiant imagery and other phenomena. Wow, what a mouthful. Well, it turns out that this is a rather big field. It's used by governments, military, surveying companies, you name it. But we're going to talk about some simple, easy to learn techniques that will help make our model making more enjoyable and extend our opportunities. So first I'm going to talk about the photograph. Photos may be ones you have taken or obtained from sources such as books, magazines, and especially the internet. However, not all photos are created equal. The image may be taken at an inconvenient angle. It may be poorly focused, taken in poor lighting, with shadows obscuring important detail, and or have poor exposure. The best photos for modeling are sharp, crisp images taken straight on in direct light with low image distortion caused by some wide-angle lenses. However, compromise is usually necessary. For example, we can't go back in time to rephotograph something that no longer exists. And also, fences or other physical obstructions may limit access even when we do have a contemporary subject. So, what to do about that? First, I want to talk about the choice of cameras if we are taking the photos. So, any camera will do, but certain ones are more suitable. Most cell phone cameras have very wide angle lenses which are optimized for taking close ups of people and may therefore introduce undesirable distortion in photographs intended to be measured for model making. However, cell phones do have their place if their limitations are understood. Digital single lens reflex and older film SLR cameras are a better choice as they have a wide range of lenses available and feature convenient to use setting adjustments. Now, something very important when you're making a site visit to something that currently exists, it's really important to obtain permission from the property owner before entering on private property to take photos and measurements. And I found in most cases when you state clearly what you want to do and that you're a model maker and this is helping you in your research, people are sometimes quite enthusiastic about even helping you and offering relevant information. So obtain permission first. Now, the first example I'm going to show you is a model of a CNR wood chip car that I made years ago. And I was given a photograph by the late Frank Lemick, who is also an NMRA member, and he was a commercial photographer. And the photo I'm going to show you is an excellent example of a well-composed, well-exposed, straight-on, well-lit, and sharply focused photo, ideal for model making. So this is the print that he gave me. And Frank used a speed graphic camera, which could be adjusted to minimize perspective distortion. He also had considerable darkroom experience and accurately printed this picture in HO scale, allowing direct measurements. And indeed, I've put a HO scale ruler in the scan there. Although most of us lack this sort of experience, we now enjoy the benefit of many present-day computer-based photography solutions. So to scale the picture, Frank had to have known at least one actual dimension, such as the overall car body length. This information can also be inferred knowing certain standard part sizes such as door widths. Rebuilt cars like this one were converted from standard boxcar designs for which dimensions may also be known. So few tools are required to really get the information out of photos. So if you're 40 or more, you probably are already using an optivisor. That's very familiar to practically most of the model railroaders I know. Next over is an architect scale, which has all kinds of different scales we commonly use. There's a similar one called an engineering scale, which has a lot of divisions based on powers of 10, which are very useful. Then there's a couple of sizes of dividers and a vernier caliper. Now, the dividers could even be something out of a $7 school geometry set. They don't have to be a fancy pair. And then next over is a machinist scale, an HO scale rule, and a protractor. So these are some of the basic things we need to take measurements from photos. So here's another view which might be typical of what might just be available, and maybe you don't have a square-on photo. So this end view of this car is taken in a traditional three-quarter view. So knowing the car height from the side view, comparative vertical measurements may be taken at any one vertical line using dividers or calipers. So if you can see the cursor here, if we consider the near corner to the camera, everything along that line can be measured in relative proportion to each other. But if we want to take a measurement of, say, the center of the car, we have a different problem, because in perspective, there's a series of perspective lines radiating out to a vanishing point at the right along the top chord and along the end sill, and it goes to a vanishing point on the right. Similarly, there's a set of perspective lines receding over to a vanishing point on the left, coming along the bottom sill to the left and along the top chord to the left. So as we move further away from the center of the picture, all of the lines are proportionately reduced. So we can't directly make a comparison of a measurement taken on this corner with some other location. So that's what the effect of perspective does in this case. However, let's say that we know that the car body is 12 feet high from the top of this chord to the bottom of this end sill. So let's say we're interested in the height of the ladder and where it intersects the side. So let's say that we take our dividers and we take a measurement from here to here, and we take another measurement from the top chord down to the side sill, and we find that the top of the ladder is 0.75 or 3/4 of the overall side height. So if we know that the car is 12 feet high, we then know that the end plate or the top of the ladder would be 0.75 times 12 or 9 feet above the underframe. So we can take all the dimensions we want. We can even figure out the spacing of the ladder rungs. any other features we're interested in along this corner. Now, let's say we want to find the height of the brake step. And we can use a similar procedure, but we now must proportion our measurements on a line running through the brake step. So let's consider the left edge. So if we take the ratio of this point to the bottom and the car top to the bottom, we still know the car is 12 feet high, but the vertical line that we're using is now intersecting the brake step, so we'll get an accurate number. So you just have to be aware of the effect of proportion as it's changed with the perspective receding to the vanishing points. So here's the finished model that I built a long time ago from this 2 photographs actually was all I had. So now if we are actually going out to gather field measurements ourselves, assuming the structure or rolling stock still exists, it's really handy to have a number of things in advance. And you need a couple of pencils, some colored markers or pencils are good. I like to use a sharp fine tip mechanical pencil, good eraser. You need a calculator. Clipboard is handy. This blue tape is a 100-foot tape, and the red one is a 16-footer. The 16-footer is handy when you're trying to measure smaller distances, especially things over your head, because to a certain extent the carpenter's tape there will be able to hold itself stiff for 3 or 4 feet above you. And I have a checklist of all the things that I usually need to take to site. So you don't want to get out there and find that you're missing something and you've partially wasted your trip. So in fact, I keep a case with everything I need ready to go. And the other thing that I have is a photo stick to graduate it 4-foot stick of wood. I'll talk more about that later. So the next project that I'm going to talk about is a model I made of a CN Yardman's shanty that used to live in Rockingham Yard in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I took some photos during a vacation in Halifax in 1980. And then from the photos and a few field measurements, I made a drawing and then built an HO scale model. So this process doesn't have to be terribly elaborate. This picture is an example of one I took at the time. And if you think about the front of the building, everything is in the same plane except the roof. So I could take, if I knew the width of the building, I could proportionately scale off the width of the windows and the door and the spacing between the windows, even the size of the sign, and so on. If you knew the height of the boards, you can also figure out the height and check that against field dimensions you might have taken. So then what I did here is I made a very simple paper scale to match the photo, and then I can use that as kind of a scale ruler that applies just to this photo. So that's a very, very old and simple method. So you don't need anything too complicated for this type of project. And sometimes we have angled pictures, and they're still useful to confirm detail placement and proportion. I'll talk more about that later. So here's the drawing done back in my pencil and paper days, and this is perfectly acceptable and useful for making a model. So here's the model I made, and I took some liberty to figure out what the interior would be like, because the interior was pretty much gutted by the time I saw the building. But the exterior is fairly accurate to the prototype. A similar project, which was a little more involved, which I did a number of years ago, was to build a model of the Intercolonial Railway blacksmith shop in Moncton. This building actually still exists. Used to be owned by Canadian National Railways, and now it's privately owned. And I made a drawing using the same kind of methods I described earlier, and I was lucky enough to have it published in the CN Lines publication of the Canadian National Railway Historical Association. And this is the model I made. So I just want to show you that the methods work, and if you're patient and careful, you can produce a pretty accurate model. So photo enhancement software, which we all pretty much have access to now, is very, very helpful for this type of work. For historical subjects, we simply have to use the available existing pictures that may or may not be ideal for our purpose. Most digital cameras come with some basic editing software, and there's more sophisticated options such as Lightroom Classic and Photoshop and several others that have very useful features. For example, Photoshop includes a perspective removal tool called Perspective Warp that may be used to advantage to make angled prototype photos more useful for modeling. So do other programs include that feature. So a basic use of photo enhancement software could be just as simple as adjusting the exposure and contrast settings that will reveal more detail in a less than ideal photo. So this CNR caboose, or van as they are called in Canada, is kind of an underexposed, not that great photo, but I've spruced it up here and you can see a lot more of the detail. And keep in mind, we're not entering a photo contest here. We're just trying to get the information so we can make a model. Now this picture was of 3 old bunk cars I took in Moncton in 1973, and then later on when I went to make a model, it was the only photo I had of these cars. So what to do? So I started zooming in and making some basic image enhancements. You can see I've started lightening the image and drawing out the shadows. And I've also started increasing the exposure, and you can see how the ends are starting to appear. Like this ladder, which over here is almost hidden, is now visible. And you'd be amazed at what detail you can pull out of less than ideal photos using photo software. So figuring out dimensions in an angled picture in the receding perspective plane is tricky, but it's possible. For example, knowing the overall car body length and counting the vertical siding boards, in this case, helped me determine the window sizes and spacing. However, using the Photoshop Perspective Warp tool is also an effective, although multi-step process. So this is an example of how you could use Photoshop. So you basically open the photo and you place a grid over the portion of the image to be straightened. And it's very easy to do. You just place these dots right at the corners and you'll see a grid appear. And then you push and pull the grid until it's approximately parallel and rectangular. And you can see that the image looks squished, but the perspective has been removed. So then you have an export function in Photoshop, and you can export it in various formats. And in this case, I imported it into a computer-aided drafting program, or you could import into any other graphics software as long as it has accurate scaling capability. So in my case, I used DraftSite by Dassault Système. It's a very good AutoCAD compatible at a much, much cheaper price. I've been using it for 3 years and I use it a lot in model railroading. So in this case, we knew that the prototype car had a width of 36 feet. So I drew a box 36 feet or 432 inches wide. And I also put a scale on. And the next thing I did was I stretched the image until the width of the photo matched the 36-foot width of the box. And horizontal measurements, horizontal dimensions may be now measured directly right off the CAD drawing. And with more photo editing, I could have fixed the vertical dimensions as well, which I didn't show in this example. So here's the models I made. The first two on the left are scratch-built, homemade one-piece resin cast bodies with Tishy windows, microscope, slide cover glass. And the right is a kit by Brian Pate that I cut in with windows and also their Tishy. All the hardware is scratch-built except the trucks and smokestacks. So now a more complicated project that I took on a few years ago is to build a model of a preserved station called Apahawk. There's a little town about a third of the way between Moncton and St. John, New Brunswick called Apahawk, and it was on the main line of the CN between Moncton and St. John. And about 30 years ago, this station was moved to the New Brunswick Agricultural Museum in Sussex, and I obtained permission from the museum to measure it a few years ago. So in cases like this, where there is a structure that already exists, it's very handy to take photos in advance and return with printed copies so you can mark them up with your dimensions as you take them. This saves a lot of time compared with making sketches on site, and it's also less likely that you'll make an error. So that's an example of the front of the station that I've measured up. Now, when you're doing this, you can also include measurements right in your photos. And on the left is an ordinary measuring tape. I urge you to exercise caution to watch out for overhead power lines when extending metal tape measures, because it's very easy to get preoccupied with what you're doing and you kind of can forget your surroundings. But on the right is the photo stick again. And in archaeology, it's called a measuring rod. That's really where this comes from. In my case, it's a 4-foot piece of wood accurately graduated in 1-inch, 3-inch, and 6-inch increments. And it's much easier to read the details in enlargements of photos taken at a distance due to resolution limitations in your cameras. By the way, a friend of mine in Hamilton, Ontario, Ron Tuff, has an interesting variation on the photo stick. He took a wooden folding carpenter's rule and painted the alternating sections black and white, and he can just fold that right up and keep it in his camera bag. So it's kind of a neat thing to do. Now, when you're taking photos, it's very important to do whatever you can to minimize perspective distortion. So at the top photo, you can see the end window there taken with a wide angle lens, and you can see the distortion in the window. Particularly the top of the window appears narrower. If you look at the bottom photo, it was taken with a telephoto lens from quite a bit further away, and there's less perspective distortion. You can really see this if you look at the top photo, and the roof brackets there are obviously extending out to the left and the right because we're so close with a wide angle lens. And in the bottom photo, you can see that the roof brackets are more nearly parallel and extending towards the camera. Now, they're not perfectly parallel, but they're much better. And in both cases, you can see that I've put the photo stick in to help me scale anything I want in that plane. And on the right is a CAD drawing of that window based on the field measurements and interpreted measurements using the photo stick. Other useful techniques are to measure individual repeating features such as clapboards, bricks, and shingles and count the rows. So in this case, something I want to point out is counting rows of shingles will help determine the relative distance between the various roof features along the plane sloping away from the camera. However, a cautionary note here is that direct measurements taken along the roof slope are inaccurate due to the receding perspective because the roof surface isn't parallel to the camera's film plane. So we would need to have a photo taken at a 90-degree angle to get the full extent of the slope, and then go back and interpolate, for instance, where the toilet vent is, and so on. Other techniques are basically things you can confirm using standard features such as door sizes and window sizes. However, be very careful about assumptions as dimensions vary, and there's variation in dimensions between commercial and private buildings as well. Now, for measuring roofs, I use for small, low buildings, and especially where I have permission to be there, I've used a simple method called what I call the weighted string. So what you do is you have a spool of string, household string, with a small lead weight, like a fishing weight, and you unroll quite a bit of string and you zigzag it in front of you, and then you throw the weight over the roof, and then you pull the weight back and adjust it to be parallel with the roof, and you in fact bring the weight or plumb bob so that it's just touching the ground on the far side, and you make a knot on the near side. It's also an extremely good idea to take a look at where any windows are before you do this, in case you throw it wrong. And so then you take the string off the roof and you lay it out straight on the ground, and you measure the total string length, and make note of that. So to summarize, you unroll lots of string and zigzag it on the ground in reverse length with the weighted end outwards. Throw the weight over the roof and align it parallel with the shingles. Pull the weight back until it touches the ground with the string dangling vertically like a plumb bob. Locate the spool end of the string on the near side until it just touches the ground vertically below the roof edge, and mark the spool end of the string and measure the whole length of the string. So what do you do now? So a fairly easy calculation is to basically recognize that the total string length is twice the eaves height and twice the roof slope for a simple building like this. So if you write this out, total string length is twice the eaves height plus twice the roof slope, and you rearrange it and solve for roof slope, you find out that the roof slope is the total string length minus twice the eaves height divided by 2. And presumably the eaves are low enough to the ground that you can take a direct measurement with your carpenter's type measuring tape. So basically, to summarize, the string length spanned the whole roof and twice the roof height at the eaves. We measure the roof height of the eaves. We subtract twice that amount from the total string length. The remaining string length is twice the roof slope distance. So dividing that by 2 gives you the distance along one roof slope. Now, as an example, let's say the total string length was 70 feet and the eaves height was 10. We'd end up with a roof slope of 25 feet, which is quite plausible in that case. There's another method in case you can't make a clean throw over the building, and actually my wife, Annette Fougère, came up with this, and you basically only throw it just over the peak and pull it back to the peak, and the calculation is simpler, and it basically means that the roof slope is the total string length minus the eaves height. You could use this all the time. I find there's a slight advantage in throwing the thing over the whole roof, because then any slight differences will be averaged out. But basically, I've used this method quite a bit too, and there you go. So when you can't get a clean throw, or there's a tree behind the building or some other thing like that, throw the weighted string, but pull the weight back just to the roof peak, again keeping the spool end vertical where it touches the ground. Measure the total string length, subtract the roof height at the soffit, and the remaining string length equals the roof slope distance. Now there's another method when you can't use the string method or it's not practical. You can do this with a bit of trigonometry. Now if you happen to be a surveyor or you know somebody who is a surveyor and they have a surveying theodolite, you can get very accurate results by shooting lines to the top of the building and taking a reference angle to the ground. But for our purposes in the hobby, adequate results are possible by sighting along a protractor placed on top of a leveled stool at some known distance from the building. So if you recall your high school trigonometry, the height is the distance from the point where the angle is measured times the tangent of theta. And we know that the tangent is opposite over adjacent. So basically, if the angle we measured with our protractor was 20 degrees and the distance away was 200 feet, the height would be 72.8 feet. So that would be a multi-story building or something like that, a bridge, anything we want to measure. So here's the completed drawing I made of the Apahawk station. And fortunately, the museum opened the station, and therefore the interior partitions and everything could be measured as well. So it's very lucky to get that kind of cooperation. And here's the finished model I made. So I leave it up to you whether I captured the prototype correctly or not. Another technique that is extremely helpful is the photo underlay technique. I don't know if there's an official name for this, but that's what I call it. So assuming the availability of good square-on pictures, another useful photo interpretation technique involves importing a picture into a layer of a CAD program, such as DraftSight or any other CAD program, and the subject is then traced out in another layer. This is equivalent to using a suitably rescaled photo under tracing paper. Now, you could go to a photocopier and fix up your photos and go ahead and do it entirely with pencil and paper. I find using computer techniques allows you a lot more freedom in and flexibility in how to do this and get good results. It's very important. You still need to watch out for picture distortion, and this method is especially useful when a complete set of field measurements can't be obtained, which is quite often the case. So as an example, I'm going to use the photo underlay procedure applied to the Kokan, New Brunswick range front lighthouse, which I'm currently building a model of. And so starting with a set of basic field measurements, as you see here, an outline of the structure is drawn in the CAD program working layer, as you see on the right. And we need to know at least something about the real building, such as the base width and the slope of the sides. So if we know that, we can then take a photo and import it into another layer of the CAD program, in this case using the attach image command. Now, the photo must have been taken as square on as possible, preferably using a telephoto lens from a few hundred feet away. Now, the real lighthouse is about 26 feet high, and ideally it would have been nice to have been on a ladder with the center of the camera about 13 feet above the ground. But that wasn't entirely possible. However, as I went further and further away from the building, the land sloped upwards a little bit, so I did get some elevation to use to advantage. And I also took about 10 images to get the one that was the most vertical, as I did not have a tripod with me. Now, some cameras include a level feature, which is very useful to have. So basically, this is the best I could do with what I had available. So I imported it into the CAD program, and if you look here, you can see where I started drawing in the outline and a little bit more than the outline. And I also put in a center line in the CAD program drawing, this cyan colored line. And that's very important to keep everything symmetrical. So in this case, I used a different technique to adjust the image size. So I first, after I imported the photo, I measured the width that the CAD program thought the photo was using the get distance command to get, in this case, the width of the base. So I'll call that X. And then I calculated a scale factor, which is the actual known building measurement that I took on site divided by measurement X. So let's say that the real building was 20 feet wide, but the measurement on your CAD program said 10 feet. So your scale factor would be 20 divided by 10, or 2. So you then call up the scale command, and it takes you through some prompts, and you enter the calculated scale factor and press the button, and the photo is rescaled. And then you recheck it using the get distance command again to make sure that it really is scaled properly. And this is an incredibly accurate method. Now, once you get the photo fixed up, you start tracing in the details over the correctly rescaled image. But notice that there's still a little bit of picture distortion at the very top. So that vent is kind of receding away from the camera, and it's going a little bit to the right. And even though the lower parts of the photo, as I checked them, were still good. So this is where the center line comes in. So what we're going to do is we're going to average out these measurements to make the actual final drawing symmetrical. And another tip is that when you're measuring or calculating roof slopes, or you're measuring them directly, you'll find that carpenters from the time 0 have always used some even number for the angle of the slope, like 30 degrees, 45, 60, and so on. If you come up with some number like 27 3/8 of a degree, chances are your measurements aren't 100%. So in this case, I can clearly see it's 30 by measuring directly off the photo. And you'll find, surprisingly enough, that those kinds of observations are typical. And you can also do some interesting things, like the door had a maple leaf painted on it. So you can bring that into the CAD program on another photo. And there's a tool called the polyline tool, and you can basically trace out an image of some arbitrary shape by placing dots over all the points of interest on the image. And you can fix up reasonable photo distortion with reference to the center line. For example, notice at the top left that I've pulled the dots in a little bit to make the top of the maple leaf symmetrical. And you can in fact see in the lower right here that the final image is quite symmetrical. And as a matter of fact, this method is used often by people who create artwork for decals. And there's all kinds of programs for doing that. A friend of mine uses Inkscape. Other people may use CorelDRAW. There's all kinds of software for that. So here's one view of the final drawing. And basically, this happens to be the east elevation. I've determined by checking that the resulting drawing accuracy available using the photo underlay method is actually within about 5% of true size, which is pretty darn good for a model purpose. And in comparison, you can get about 1% accuracy if a complete set of field measurements is available. So either one of these methods is very helpful. So in conclusion, I recommend that you make a photo stick. I encourage you to prepare a checklist of all the tools and measurement aids you will need before traveling to the site. Take clear, well-lit, well-focused square-on photographs from as far back as reasonable to minimize distortion. If feasible, bring pre-printed pictures to site to mark up with dimensions. Think creatively about how to use building features, for example, counting boards, bricks, and shingles. Use photo software to enhance less than ideal historical pictures. Using CAD software adds flexibility and accuracy in what can be accomplished. And please do consider using the photo underlay method, especially when obtaining complete set of measurements isn't feasible. So just go out and get started. And I have some resources here. If later on you want to play this back and pause, you can see I've included the drafting program I use, Photoshop, Lightroom Classic. There's a couple of other photo programs that friends use. I have not used them, but they come highly recommended. One is Affinity Photo 2, and the other is Photoscape X. So there you go. So as Porky Pig would say, so that's all, folks. Are there any questions?
Oops, I pulled a Martin. I was muted. I just want to update that also add to your list of um, resources there that your previous clinic was on March 23rd, the fourth day of NRX last year. It was the first clinic of the day. So people want to use YouTube and find NRX in our live group of clinics. They can see your first one. On to the questions. So, would you please comment a little more on the software you're using and the cost of it?
Sure. So for the drafting program, DraftSite was recommended by a friend of mine who's a mechanical engineer, and he actually used it professionally in the aviation industry for many years. And one of the things it's got going for it is it's much, much cheaper than AutoCAD. AutoCAD's kind of the de facto standard in the industry. But my version of DraftSite is the basic version, which originally was about $99 US, and now it's gone up. My annual renewal is something like 172 Canadian. So anyway, they now want you to take the professional version, which I believe is 299 US a year. But some people may balk at that and think, wow, that's a lot of money. But people frequently pay a lot more than that for the latest locomotive with DCC in it. And I've used this software for many projects for the past 3 years. So, it ends up being a very valuable tool. As far as the photo software goes, I have another hobby of mine, which is sort of tied in with model railroading, is photography. So I chose to take a subscription to Lightroom and Photoshop. I recommend Lightroom Classic if you want to keep the program on your computer. Otherwise, they offer a cloud version. But it turns out that if you also want to save the images on your local storage, you can get a much cheaper price by digging through their website, and you can find a good price. I'm paying $12.99 Canadian, which I think is a bit less than $10 US, and plus tax. And the one with 20 gigabytes of cloud storage is something like double the price. So, it's still something you pay for. But the programs that I recommended there, Affinity and Photoscape X, are either much cheaper or free, and they do have many of the same attributes. So it pays to talk about this with your friends, and especially people into photography, and see what you can find.
So, do you have to upload your photos, or when you take the picture, it uploads itself?
I can upload directly from the camera to my own computer, and it then allows me to put archival information on there, such as keywords and other things. It's quite useful.
And you say it was called Lightroom?
Lightroom, yes.
Lightroom.
I use Lightroom Classic, which is the older version that runs on the computer locally.
Okay. So I only have a cell phone camera. Can I still use it to take overall shots of buildings and rolling stock?
Yes, you can. Now, notwithstanding the points I made about the wide angle lens issues, what most cell phone cameras, if you dig into the settings, you can increase the resolution quite a bit. Many of them are set for sort of mid-range setting resolutions so that you can email photos and not consume huge amounts of bandwidth. Basically, most cell phone cameras do have resolution adjustments. So the higher the better for this particular task. And then you would still want to go away, back up as far as you can if that's possible, and then zoom in with the camera and try your best. I use the cell phone too, but if I'm on an actual job where I know that I'm going somewhere to make measurements, I'll take my SLR camera.
Okay.
But many people today now have cell phone cameras, and in fact, there are third-party attachment lenses you can get to change the properties of the
Hmm.
built-in lens.
Now, do you set your SLR camera also to the highest quality?
Yes, because when you're zooming in, you may actually end up working with only a very small portion of the overall image. So the more pixels you have, the better. That's a good question, Speed. More
Cool.
pixels is good when you're going over pictures with a fine-tooth comb.
So you mentioned at some point about the kind of even numbers that they use, like 30 degrees or 40 degrees. Would it be wrong to model something that's at 32 and a half degrees?
No, and certainly you can't, the minute you say, well, roofs are only on in certain multiples of angles, people will be coming forward and there'll be thousands of comments. So my roof is not like that. But the fact is that I was told this information actually by a retired builder who said that in days past, carpenters had carpenter squares with certain rules of thumb marked on them, and
Uh-huh.
and nobody goes out of their way to make their job more difficult than it has to be. And through time, they also know how rain sheds from roofs and snow sheds from roofs, and so kind of standard rules of thumb evolved.
Yes. Yes.
And once you start, the funny thing about doing this kind of site visit and measuring is you hear about these kind of rules of thumb, but you start to see them as you're doing your research. It's a fun part of the job.
And when you mention that to some family member, then you sound like a professional, right?
Well, they all know that we're on the eccentric scale as it is.
Yeah.
So
What if all you have is historical photos, all black and white photos? How would you use those if you can?
same way, for example, I've taken photos out of the old car builder cyclopedias and I've scanned them in the computer. And again, you need to know something about the subject of the photo. Like, for example, the wheelbase of the truck or the length of the car body. Like, if it's a 40-foot, 6-inch box car, that kind of information is really good. Now, it just so happens that a lot of those old photographs, like car builder cyclopedia photographs, were professionally taken by professional photographers. So they were kind of natural for what
Hmm.
we need. And then another really good source is old postcards that you can get at flea markets and things. And um, you've got to be creative. The further away the image is in the picture, and the smaller the actual area to work with, you may have to wing it a bit to get some dimensions. But if your doorway is coming out at 5 feet, probably that's not right. 6 foot 6 would be probably better. 9 or 10 feet for a story, things like that.
Hmm.
So just use common sense and give it a sanity check. When you finished your sketch or drawing, uh, just does it look like the real thing, or does it look kind of squashed or too narrow? Or And don't be afraid to keep adjusting it within reason.
Did you ever come across the whole selective compression thing where we can't show all 9 windows because we don't have enough space for 9 windows, and then your photos don't align with that?
Yes, and what you have to do in that kind of a situation is you kind of have to look at the building, the real building, and say, what's a real typical characteristic of this building? Like if somebody was driving by in the car, oh, I know that building. Well, what is it that they know about that building? Is it because it has some interesting clapboards? Is it because it has some interesting ventilators on the roof? Is it because it has a certain repeating pattern of windows? So try to see what it is about that building that catches your eye. And then whatever that is should be the basis for your compression.
Compression.
So I've seen cases where modelers have had a building with, say, 9 windows and they've built it with 6. And they've still created the impression that it's for instance, a shed or railway warehouse or something where it's a long building and it has repeating windows. It just doesn't have all the repeating windows. So you kind of have to do that. It's the same with locomotive models, especially steam locomotives. Like railroads had a family appearance, and if you kind of see what that family appearance is, you could almost get away with putting those details on a block of wood, and people would say, "Oh, that's a Great Northern engine because it's got green on it, and it looks nice." So
Yeah. So I have a reduced building here that I got from somewhere where someone decided, oh, we're not going to do 4 bays out to the rail side. We're going to only do 2 bays. But on the back side of the building, there's no doors because the doors were on the far right hand side where they cut those extra 2 doors out. So there's no way to get into the building except for showing up in a boxcar and getting on the platform. So
yeah, well,
I was
that's
like,
where you got to kind of say maybe it pays to go to sleep on it and come up in the morning and you say, then I'll do my sanity check.
yes.
And we
Okay.
all have the ability to redo something. I mean, don't get into the habit of saying, well, I've done it, we're done, that's it. Be critical of your own work.
Correct. Okay, last question. Can you go over the reason again to include a photo stick instead of a measuring tape?
Yes, basically the graduations on the photo stick are larger to start with. The smallest I use is 1 inch, and then 3, 6, and 12. And the alternating segments are black or white. So in a enlarged photo, you can get a nice crisp edge. Now, if you think about the measuring tape in the example I showed, it has 16ths on it, like a typical carpenter's tape. And by the time you enlarge that in a photo, it's going to start to get blurry. There's not a lot of contrast on the tape to see the edges. It's just, I found it's harder. And it's a lot easier to say, you know, I'm halfway through a 3-inch section, so it must be 1.5 inches from the edge. It's once you get used to it, it's very easy.
Well, thank you for a very, very insightful update. Um, we appreciate it, and I'm certain that a lot of people are going to watch this again.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope the rest of the evening goes very well.
Thank you, sir. Welcome back to the last clinic tonight for NMRAx here in April. Our next guest has been 3D printing for more than 6 years. He has been doing it professionally for 4 years and has worked for some of the biggest names in the industry. Guess what? When you look at his photo, I'd like to introduce, with making 3D printing less intimidating, all the way from Tallahassee, Florida, Logan Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, how you doing? So, thanks for having me on, Speed, and thank you everyone else for letting me come and chat with you all for a little bit. So, on this clinic, basically going to a couple handful of train shows. I went to the Amherst, one of the larger train shows from what I understand in your guys' industry, as well as one of the Southeast region at Plant City. I took some time since I worked for both of these companies as I was going around chatting with people in the space and in model railroading to find out some people, the reason they haven't been using more 3D printing tools in their modules is that they kind of don't know where to start. And I was a little shocked because I know a few people that 3D print in model railroading and they seem to know what's going on and said it's been catching on. But when I went to a place where there were just tons of people coming out to show off their layouts and show off some of the stuff that they've created, there isn't a ton of 3D printing. Even at the Amherst show, I was surprised there was a few less booths, and I thought there might be, considering the application that the tools have for your guys's hobby, passion. I don't want to downgrade it anyway, so please forgive me. But what I want to talk about though is how I think 3D printing is applicable, as well as like where to start, because it seemed like that was a general theme that typically the only reason people hadn't been using it already for their layouts and to create more unique modules is just they didn't really know the basics, where to start, and what, it's just intimidating. And you'll see some of that in this. So I'm going to try and do my best to make it as simple as possible and simplify what can be an overly complicated way of doing things. It's a new novel approach to manufacturing. It allows people to have decentralized manufacturing. You guys can create whatever you want in your homes. You can create things for each other, and you can do it out of your garage, out of your workshop. So let's dive in a little bit. On here, I wanted to show you that we have the Multi-Layered Concepts website. That is my own small business. It's the one that I'm moving into the 3D printing space with. I've had my own LLC for 6 years now, and I'm going more from a broad, like buying and selling products, to leaning more into the 3D printing since I've had the chance to be in the space. So let's talk a little bit about where to get started. So if you want a 3D print, there's some first things that you need to know. And I'm going to kind of go with, if I were to restart this, knowing what I know now, and guide myself through how to get started in 3D printing, that's kind of the approach I took when it came to this presentation. When I first started, it was one of those things that I kind of didn't know what it was about. I kind of just wanted to see what a 3D printer could do. I just was going to do it for fun. And I found out that there's actually a lot of pitfalls if you don't know what you're doing or where to go. So my goal here is to kind of accelerate your learning in terms of like, you can just kind of do the things that I'm mentioning here, and it'll save you potentially a year plus worth of diving in and learning and testing and sampling. So one of the first things that I think you guys need to do is download a slicer program. You need model files and things to print, and these model files are called STLs. But if you have the slicer program, they're free. And the reason why I think you should start here is because it gives you a chance to tinker with 3D printing. It gives you a chance to take a look at kind of what the file will look like, how the printer is going to move around to build the design, and it'll give you access to settings like temperature settings, the width of the extrusions, and the different things that the printer needs to be capable of. So my approach here is, if you take the slicer and all the information that you get from putting the model that you want into it, it'll kind of help you isolate what things you need your printer to do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But the first thing, you can get free slicer from Prusa3D.com. You can use the Prusa slicer, and what you're going to do is import a model, and I'll show you a picture in the following slide about that. But like I said, it'll give you the parameters of your project, and you can look at what temperature do you need for different types of plastic. So in the slicer, you can select the plastic type, you can select some settings. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So on this page, and I don't know if y'all can see my cursor here or not, but let's pretend you can. In the top right, you have the print settings. So this will tell you kind of like what layer height you need to use. You can select the filament in a drop-down box on that second menu down, and then you can select your printer profile. And so there's a lot here when you're looking at the screen. You have infills and supports, and these things matter down the road, but there's a few rules of thumb, and I'll try to making models, not necessarily items that require certain types of loads or certain types of deflection. Here's like, what quality can your profile of your printer do? So you can go into this software that you can download for free on Prusa.com. You can select the printer or go through the wizard and put in multiple printers, and then you can kind of look through the settings and see what they're capable of doing. And you can just buy a printer, and we'll talk about the printers that I recommend in a second. But the thing that's important is kind of getting familiar with this software, because this is like 80% of what you're going to be interfacing with in terms of, you know, getting your print started and being able to manufacture your own parts. So this slicer program and kind of going through the settings, knowing how to set up a print, knowing how to enter a printer in, is like the most complicated part, I'd say, in terms of getting your prints going. But once you have some things established and you have a process set up, and you can think a little bit like what we call process engineering. Basically, recipe is another term that they use in process engineering for, like, basically just like if you were baking a cake or something, you have ingredients, right? I'm going to use PETG plastic. It needs a certain temperature setting, so it's like 230 degrees Celsius, and we're going to run at these certain speeds, which, like I said, the stock speeds are fine in the slicer. So if you use the right recipe, your print should go off without a hitch. The only other thing being, there is some mechanical things to consider. One being the cleanliness of your build plate. Your prints can stick or not stick, or they have adhesion or no adhesion based on how dirty they are. So there are some mechanical things that you'll have to do and learn as you go. But like I said, for the most part, to try and make this a little less intimidating, get the slicer program. You can do it before you ever buy a printer. Play with it, learn about it. And if you feel comfortable about how to use or utilize this software, the rest of the stuff's going to be cake. So the second thing you'll have to think about in terms of what you need for 3D printing is some kind of online repository or CAD program. So the online repositories are just a place that you can go and search for models. I mentioned earlier STLs. Those files are the type of files that you'll need. OBJs are another one, an object file. It's basically the 3D representation of what your printer is going to bring into the physical world. So if you go to something like printables.com or tinkercad.com, or sorry, Thingiverse, these two, you can search for model railroad, things that people have already created. You can search for, you know, trees or flowers or something that, you know, may be relevant. The only problem is the repository is only as good as what the community is sharing with the company that hosts the repository. So if you need specific things to model railroading, they may not have a huge robust, depending on which one you look at. And that's where a CAD program would come into play. Tinkercad is an easy one to get started. It's kind of like playing with digital Legos. You have shapes, you can combine the shapes. I've already been on Tom's Trains and Things and kind of talked a little bit about like Tinkercad basics. So if you wanted to learn a little bit about that, you could go there. But YouTube is also chock full of explanations and tutorials, and I'll even be making some more like basics of 3D printing and how to get started tutorials. So everything we're talking about today, next month I'm going to be spending some time creating like how-tos and just basically where to get started and trying to break it down and make it as easy as possible to get started. And then from there, people can go on their own journey. So printables.com, thingiverse.com, you can search something that someone else has already created. If you want to learn how to do the CAD, you can create things yourself, and that will require a little bit more knowledge. However, that's like the artistic side of 3D printing. And once you learn how to model, you can create just about anything that you want, and you can make your layouts really unique. So things like signs, I made some demo signs that I took with me to one of the train shows that I went to, like a highway sign that you would see, bridges and things like that. A lot of those already exist, but if you wanted something specific, you could learn to model those pretty easily. Certain smaller structures, like there are things you can that are very simplistic geometric shapes that you can create yourself. And then especially, from what I understand, a lot of you guys are very handy with what we call post-processing, but would be like sanding, painting, and beautifying models that you've sculpted or created by hand. You can use 3D printing to get you 90% of the way there, and then you can do the rest of it with traditional methods that you're used to. So I want you guys to start thinking of a 3D printer more along the lines of it being a tool and something that you can utilize. Not that it'll do the whole job for you, because there are ways to do that, but to get multicolor prints to be just beautiful and structurally perfect, it does take a bit of time to get there. But if you were to make kind of the bare bones of your object, then you can finish it by hand with things that you guys have already done. So that might be one way to make this thing less intimidating, is to think of it as you're making components or pieces for things that you've already done. And then as you get better, you can go maybe 70% of it done with a 3D printer, 30% by hand, then 80-20, 90-10, right? So Tinkercad and Fusion 360 will help you do that. Like I said, Tinkercad's kind of like digital Legos. Fusion 360 is the CAD more along the lines of like a professional. You make 2D drawings and you extrude them. And takes a little bit more knowledge to utilize that program. So this is an example of the printables repository. So if you can see on the left-hand side, there's all these categories. There's art and design, costume and accessories, healthcare, household, sports and outdoor, tabletop miniatures, world scans. So there's things that you can go and search around for and see if things that you want already exist. If you want something in the real world that's popular or a known, like a memorial or something, some of these are already created. So if you look up monuments and things like that around the US, there's a chance that those are already modeled. And so if a vendor, and this is kind of a thing I was talking with people about at the shows, I was finding out that one of the pain points you all have is that vendors don't always have a full library for the things that you want. They might have bits and pieces, and you all dive in and learn so well about the history of things and different variations and versions of things that were created. And a vendor might come along and give you one version, but not have version, BCD. And so 3D printing gives you the ability to create kind of those holes in maybe some of these different things that you want to put in your layout. So if there was certain fire truck that nobody has created and it was only made in the 60s, and I'm making this all up, I'm BSing this, by the way, But if there's something like that that doesn't exist, you could always go and create it. And there are some ways that the digital files, like you can pull in maybe a 2D image of the thing you want to create, and then you can use the software to help you get it started. And the tools are getting stronger, and they're starting to adopt AI to help make pieces of it or get you close. There's photogrammetry apps where if you have a real world thing, like let's say you wanted to put your own car, you have something that you've custom made yourself and put a lot of work into it, you can take photos of it from every angle, upload it to software, and the software will create a 3D image that you might have to clean up a little bit. But if you have a truly custom thing and you want it to be in your layout, there are ways to do that. And right now we're in a baby industry in 3D printing, so these tools will only get better as the years go on. And it's already kind of neat, the stuff that they can do even today. So this is kind of a little version of one of the little workspaces that I have in Tinkercad that I'm just putting a bunch of random stuff I was helping people with. But there's a components for a little award, there's a little bookmarker, there's a holder for sanding belts, for a belt sander. Buddy of mine wanted a toothbrush canister for traveling that he was doing. So there's just all these little things in here that, you know, with Tinkercad, I've created just by you literally like playing with Legos. You see on the right, there's all these shapes, and you can take the shapes and use them to combine. You can remove shapes from one another. You can add shapes together. There are some shape generators. So some of the text, you can do shape generation with that. There was also ways to import SVGs. So like a scalable vector graphic that you can get from, if any of you know how to use something like Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape is the free version of that. You can get the transparent images and pull them into Tinkercad. And so this, on the first, second, and third, those letters is a font that kind of matched the Trivia Night award I was making. The whole thing was based on like a neon sign on their logo. So this was like neon lettering as a font. So I was able to pull that font in and extrude it and combine it with the regular 1, 2, 3 that exists in the app. And then you have the first, second, third toppers that we put on there. So there are ways to use kind of multiple programs together, but the basics or gist of this is that you can take a cylinder and add it to a sphere. And you can, you know, create a microphone, let's say, by using a cylinder, making it tapered and putting a ball at the end, right? For oversimplification. So that's outside the scope of what this is today. But if you wanted to go take a look on YouTube or take a look at Tom's Trains, there's some kind of basics of how to get started with this. So step number 1, get the slicer, get familiar with kind of what your needs are, right? The filament types, the printer type. 2, find a model on a repository or get into Tinkercad, take a class and kind of figure out how to play with it and then just start making stuff. This is all before you even commit to a printer because they can be expensive. If you get the wrong one, they can break and have issues. And I've met plenty of people that have had a printer for a year or two that is just sitting on the sidelines because something happened. They didn't know enough about it and the community didn't quite have the right solution. And after chatting with them for about 30 minutes, I was able to help them figure out what the problem is and get their printer going again. And it just takes a little bit of the right kind of knowledge. But before you even start, I would say size up your project, size up what you want to do, verify what you need the tool for. My biased opinion, everyone should get a printer and just start figuring it out. But I've had plenty of people tell me that the way I think is like a solution looking for a problem. I want to have all the tools. I want to know how to do the stuff. And then I want to go find people that I can help with those abilities rather than here's my problem. What are the right tools to fix it? It's like, no, let's learn something cool and then go find people that need help. So my bias would be you do that approach and have fun with it and pick it up and just see kind of what the possibilities are. So this is just overview, kind of a screenshot of what a Tinkercad messy workspace looks like, and just kind of things that you can build and put together. And again, this is the more creative side of 3D printing. But if you find stuff that already exists in a repository like printables.com or Thingiverse, then you can just import it in and set it up in your slicer and send it to print. All right, so material type. One of the things that you need to understand is just kind of the types of printing and the types of materials. They all have different use cases, and we're going to try and simplify this and break it down to help you understand kind of what the easier materials are to work with, and maybe some of the slightly harder materials to work with, but have certain strength benefits, have certain heat tolerance capabilities, certain adhesion, or the deflection of the part will have memory and come back to its original shape rather than stretch and deform permanently. So 3D printing, you have what you all have probably seen, I would say is more common, is you have the spool of filament on top of the printer, and it's pushing plastic through a hot nozzle. That's called FDM, which is actually a trademark name, so the other name is FFF. Fused deposition modeling is FDM, but that one, I believe Stratasys owns the trademark on that name. So even though everyone in the industry is saying it, using it, no one's allowed to market or advertise with it, or they could get in trouble, but it's pretty much the standard name. But FFF, fused filament fabrication, if you hear that, FDM, FFF, they're the same thing. One's just protected, but you should know both because you'll hear people use them interchangeably. That is basically the plastic that goes through the hot nozzle and is deposited onto the build plate layer by layer by layer until it builds a 3D print. In this FDM, FFF filament type printing, you have PLA. Now, PLA is the easiest to print. It has the most colors. It's not very thermally stable, but if it's in an AC'd office in a house that's climate controlled, you don't have to worry about anything. If you keep your layouts in storage, but the storage is climate controlled, you don't have anything to worry about. But because the heat tolerance is around 140 degrees Fahrenheit, it can soften and deform. And if you have parts that, especially if you live in the South or you live anywhere, halfway down the U.S. into Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, like any of these places where it gets really hot in the summer, if you leave a part or leave a print or make something to put in your car over the summer, it'll probably soften and deform. So PLA being the easiest means you have an easier time creating your models, but they're less robust. They're not ideal for making things that you put outside or have any exposure to UV light, because UV tolerance is less and it can weaken, make the plastic brittle over time. The heat from the sun constantly bearing down on your print can make it weaker. So if you have modules that are in a garage and they sit in front of a window that doesn't have curtain or something, like this could be a problem for your PLA print. Or if you're transporting your prints in a tow behind trailer or in the back of an SUV, and it's during the summer and you're on your way to a show, the PLA printed parts could soften and deform. So just something to keep in mind. While it is the easiest to use, it also is the most susceptible to external environmental factors. So PETG is the next, and these names, these acronyms, I don't even want to try and tell you from memory what all of these stand for, but just know PLA, PETG, ABS, ASA, like these terms are what the names of the plastic are that you will be using typically in 3D printing. So PETG is kind of the all-arounder. It's a little less friendly to print with, mainly because it strings. So it's when it's hot, it's a little more stretchy, and you'll have little wisps that come out of the nozzle, and you can control the temperature and mess with settings and I've noticed by lowering the temperature on PETG, you get much better. Like, it makes the biggest impact, regardless of all the settings online that I've tried for everything. Lowering the temperature a little bit more has made the biggest difference. But PETG, it's a similar to what you, for water bottles that you're drinking. You buy a 24 pack of water from Costco or something. That's a similar plastic. It's basically the same plastic. It's just an additive for the 3D printing. That's what the G in PETG is for. It's the additive that they add to the plastic that you use for filament. So please don't go and make water bottles or any type of water bottles that you need to drink out of, because it's not the same. It's not food safe. So, but the PETG is 175 degrees Fahrenheit before it softens. So you have 30 more degrees. It's still kind of in the range of like the hottest summer in a black car with a black interior. Can mess with your prints, but for the most part, PETG is pretty stable. It's just you're gonna have a little bit of issues with printing, with more cleanup on plastic hairs and wisps and things that stick off your prints. So keep that in mind. But while PETG is kind of a pain to print with from that side, it gives maybe better life or longer lasting life to your parts that you make. It has better UV stability. So people do use PETG to create things. If you want to also use your 3D printer for other things, and this is something I guess I didn't mention, but I should, is that your 3D printer not only can be good for your layouts and can be good for model railroading, but you need to also like think about other uses. Something breaks in your house, you can model up or find a model of a part and you can replace it same day. If they don't sell it online or it's an obscure part, if you want to make something silly, my kids, we make little planter boxes that they put little flowers in. And so I use 3D printing for about everything. It's not just like you're going to get this tool to only do model railroading stuff with. Like, you can legitimately use it for so many things. So when we start talking about the costs here in a little bit, like, just keep in mind that it has many uses. So if you need it for around the house, if you need it for your garage, if you need it for woodworking, there's guys that are using flush trim bits, and then they 3D print a jig basically to get a certain radius of a corner or to get a certain shape, and then they slide it to the corner of the wood and then use their trimmer with a flush bit, and now it's the same shape as the jig that they printed. So there's just all kinds of ways. So keep that in mind as well. But moving on, ABS ASA is one of the other common plastics that you'll see. But while they're closer to an industrial grade plastic, lawn furniture, a lot of times made out of ABS in like huge injection molding machines. They have the highest heat tolerance, up to 220F, so they'll survive in your hot car, no problem. And they have great UV stability. ASA having better stability than ABS, but they start to max out your printer's hot ends, although these generation of printers, they know people want hotter, like performance of the hot end to print hotter, so they can use more engineering grade materials. So this is slowly becoming a thing where you don't have to worry about, is your printer capable of ABS ASA? But the thing is, it warps like a mother. Like ABS and ASA, the bigger your part gets, the more prone it is to warping and delaminating and could cause some issues. But there are ways around that. And again, right, thinking about software, thinking about your model, right? How big do you need your model to be, or how small? What type of materials do you need? And what type of environment do they need to print correctly? And now looking at ASA, ABS, you can kind of start to put the pieces together that I need 220, and because it warps, if I print it in an enclosed printer, that's going to mitigate the warping, especially if it's an actively heated chamber and it has a heater in it that makes the ambient temperature rise because of the heater, not just from the heat bed and the nozzle and things that heat up. It'll make it so you can print ABS delightfully and not worry about like a cold draft because your AC kicked on, causing your print to warp and failing a print that's been going for 15 hours already, right? So these things are good to know before you select a printer. So this is on Prussiament. Not all filament are 100% equal, but Prussiament's considered right now kind of the industry standard, mainly because Prussia's filament is monitored. You can scan a QR code and see the tolerances that they held to make your filament. And the thing is, they have some of the tightest tolerances in the industry. So when you think about your print coming out exactly with minimum defects, it's better if the raw material has a very, very tight tolerance. So these are things to think about, right? What do I buy in terms of like quality filament, or do I buy more affordable filament? And the kind of answer is, one, how tolerant are you to the visual aspect of your print? Are you willing to do more hands-on work with hand sanders and painting and fillers and things like that to beautify your print? Or do you want to try and get as close to pulling the print off and using different colors and printing it modularly, so that way the filament just is the right color and comes off and looks kind of how you want it to look? So if you want it to be like production quality, it's better to go with a high tolerance, very low tolerance. I said that right the first time. I apologize. Maintaining very high tight tolerances is the way to go with that. And Prussiament is kind of one of the industry leaders there on filament for sure, but it is a bit more expensive, as you can see. You're looking at like $31 for 2 kilograms, 2.2 pounds. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds. But you also have to pay shipping, because the filament they're just starting a push to get filament in the US, but for the most part it comes from the Czech Republic. So you're going to have to pay, I think it's like $15 for 2 spools, but then the more it goes up, the more you pay for shipping. In contrast, Overture is one of the cheaper filament companies that I've used personally, and I use them regularly. But if you look at the prices, anywhere from $19 to $22, $23 for their filament, and I've actually had a really good time using Overture. What I will say is, I think what's more important than which filament you choose, I made the mistake of buying every filament under the sun. I bought cheap filaments, I bought in between, and I bought expensive filaments, and then I ended up having like 10 different, or more vendors, just different vendors with different types of filament. So, each vendor I'd have a PLA, a PETG, ASA, and I'm printing with all these different ones and then trying to combine like multiple colors from one vendor to the other. What I'll say, the rule of thumb here, the simplifying 3D printing, just note this one down. If you're going to do 3D printing and you're going to buy from a vendor, it's better that you just choose a vendor and you set your printer up, you set your temperatures and your speeds and your settings to make that manufacturer's printer run well. And then after you have that, you can buy other materials from the same vendor with little fear of something like, oh, the blue looks wonderful, but when it transitioned to red from this other vendor, I'm starting to get surface defects on the edges or something, right? Because while they claim to all use the same settings, the different additives that they use in colors, some guys on YouTube, the engineering minded ones that are testing or finding even colors have an effect on this. So it'd be better mostly just pick a vendor, stick with the vendor, and that will eliminate a lot of headaches. As if you go into this, I recommend Overture. If you're budget friendly, if you have a little bit more room in your budget than Prussiament, you can't go wrong with that. And then you just stick with, I'm going to buy all the colors of this vendor and then use those together. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the printers themselves, because now that we know how the software works, what the software is saying our settings and needs are to produce this part with this type of plastic, we can start thinking about the printers. The Prusa MK4 kit is $800, and it's one of the things that there are fully assembled printers for the same price or less, and it takes 8 to 10 hours to build. Now, one of the marketing things that Prusa had was that if you build, and I agree, with your first printer, if you build your first printer, it's a wonderful thing to know it takes some time, but you learn what every component does on the machine. So you understand what your hot end is and what your nozzle is. And on any of these printers, I would suggest potentially changing their nozzle. I don't believe I actually added to the slideshow, but the CHT from Bondtech nozzle is currently my favorite nozzle. Like, the ingenuity that these guys had for the price is probably the best nozzle on the market, in my opinion, in terms of like regular printing, not specialized printing, high flow. So any of these kits that can take a CHT nozzle, it's the best $20 you'll spend to upgrade your printer. But if you don't have 8 to 10 hours and you don't care to learn about the parts and you want something that you can kind of set and forget, Prusa does offer a fully assembled for $1,100, and that is a lot of money. I honestly believe it myself. So if you look down, though, you can get an enclosure for an additional $350, and Prusa is kind of considered like the Mercedes, right, of 3D printing. And even though the chassis looks like the older chassis, the technology, like the components, things that you can't see, are higher quality than previous generations. So even though they maintain that original aesthetic, it actually is a very quality printer. So, but if you move on, there's some competitors coming in hot and heavy, like Bamboo Labs, their X1C, P1P, P1S, similar names for the same printer. There's like a premium one and then some stripped down versions. You want to get the Bamboo Labs P1S, in my opinion. It's the best balance between price, like affordability, and features. It's also enclosed, so you can do ABS, ASA, some of the harder nylon plastics, and have more success than if you had kind of the Cartesian, old school, open bed moves, nozzle moves type printers. So, and then Solval SV08, everybody's raving about this printer right now. It's $549. There's something called a Voron that they're saying that they knocked off, or in most of these printers, to be honest, are kind of clones of other printers, and Prusa started that trend. And that's kind of how the lore goes and the background goes. Basically, all these other companies are coming up making knockoffs of the Prusa printer. So they were kind of the original, but now some people are investing in engineering and coming up with some really crazy stuff. So Solval for $549, Creality K1 for $429. The Creality is the most affordable, but I had my nephew pick one up, and he's been having some issues, but when it works great. But when there's an issue, it is kind of a pain. And Creality's been known to have kind of hit or miss on their quality, but they are good printers if you get one that was built wonderfully, and especially at the price level. So here's some photos of the MK4, the P1S, the SV08, and the K1. Any printer on this screen, I would bless and say you can use them and they'll be wonderful. So material type, we're going to move to resin real quick, talking about the resin. So FDM, the plastic type, it has some issues where thin parts that are tall and long, it's layer adhesion, it can snap. So anything the Z height up and down can break. But with the resin printers, your material types are, we call isotropic. In all directions, they can snap, shatter, break. They're strong very similarly in all directions. But you get the most affordable, the model class resins are the most affordable, but usually the lowest strength, most brittle. The engineering class resins, the resins have a bigger library for material properties. And then you have specialty resins that are flexible and you can mix some. But resins are cured with UV. They're thermoset materials, so more light introduced to your part can cause them to keep curing and get brittle and over time have an issue. So you're going to want to paint and coat resin prints if you do it. But the one thing I want you to remember is that I have it in bold here. This is by far the messiest of all the printers, and there's still debate on how much of a problem it is to get resin on your skin and in your skin. You know, use soap, not IPA for the resin to clean it off. It is a thermoset, so if you get resin on your skin and you walk in front of a window and the sunlight hits it, that can be a problem and cause not a huge burn, but it'll get hot and you'll feel it, and you can usually wipe it off before it causes any kind of problem. But if you're not quick, it can burn your skin, so something to keep in mind. Sarai Tech flexible resins, what people have been doing, they take this resin and they take the engineering tough resin. You want to do some kind of combination, like 10%, 15% of the flex to the tough resin. Reason being, no matter how strong a resin is, when you guys are printing things for HO or N scale or smaller, they're going to be so thin they might break. So what you do is you make the resin more flexible, so that way those features bend, not break. One thing for the printers, so looking at the printer prices, they seem a little cheaper here than some of the better quality FDM. And again, there's all these $150, $200 printers. You get what you pay for. I had a buy once, cry once thing on there that I think I skipped. Don't buy the bottom of the barrel printers. It's not worth it. Just save yourself some time. Pay the extra $200 or $300. Get a good printer. It's gonna be worth it. I promise. It just all I have to say about that. But recently, Saturn put out an Ultra 4 $400 printer. This is my top choice. I just impulse bought 2 of them. They basically created one of my favorite printers from Prusa. That was a $2,000 printer, and they made it $400. So it has many of the same features. It's larger. It's like all the things I wanted the Prusa printer to be, and it's like 20% of the price. But the Prusa printer was also already established, right? You pay money to get certifications for medical, dental, things like that, and that's part of what drives the price up. This one, they just said, hey, let's send it out to the masses and let the tabletop guys use it. But they put all the mechanical features in there, so I've got 2 on the way, and I can't wait to get them. I already own a Sonic Mighty 8K, and with resin right now, you want to look at the screen that they use, the HD of the screen, and that's going to give you that better resolution, especially as your prints get much smaller. So I would say whatever the K is, I do 4K minimum, but 8 to 12K if you're going to do like N scale type stuff, something to think about. So Creality, Anycube, some of these other companies do have cheap printers, but like I said, buy once, cry once. I've had not good issues or not good things to say about some of their FDM printers. So I never tried their resin printers. But you also, on top of the printer, even though the printer's like $400 for the new Saturn, you need a wash and cure station as well. So these are what the printers look like in the new Saturn Ultra on the left that they made, and then the cheap Creality on the right. And then the Frozen, I have that one. It's $650, but it's wonderful, makes good parts. So what are we going to do with this information? Make sure that if it's an FDM printer, it has auto bed leveling. You're going to go buy an FDM printer no matter what you do. It's coming standard now, but if you're going to buy a cheap one and you're not going to listen to buy the 400 or 500 plus printers, just make sure it has auto bed leveling is the one thing. But then also make sure that in your slicer, and why you should have the slicer, if I'm going to buy some 10 log printer that no one's ever heard of, but someone did a review of, go into the slicer, make sure there's a profile. If there's no profile, it's be a nightmare to create your own profile specifically for that printer. And then, you need to buy your material based on your project needs. So do I need resin because it's small and brittle and I need flexibility and strength, or can I get away with FDM because I'm making buildings and houses and bridges, right? So pick your printer, pick your material, but some other things that you're going to need to get started, and I'm just going to break them down. I have a list here. Good snips, 91% or better isopropyl. There's additives in like the 70% and below that can cause your build plate to get slimy or not stick and have some issues. Crafter spade, this little spatula looking thing here, it's wonderful for cleaning up like these extrusion lines that they put and brims and whatever. It's just game changer. Buy it. It's worth the $5. Deburring tool to clean up the edges of your prints. So you will get sometimes little pieces of plastic that stick, or some support broke off, or some little things happen. So get the deburring tool. But with all of these things on this list, it's like $650 to $700 all in to start FDM printing. For resin printing, again, $400 to $650 for a good printer. But they do have smaller build volumes. Now, you can get an 8K printer or a 4K printer, much smaller. So if you're only making like Deere and Jaguars and small cars or whatever, barrels for docks, you can get away with a smaller printer. But you might have problems building larger parts. So something to think about. If you want the capability of both, pay the extra $200, get the Saturn, the new Saturn, and from Elegoo, get the new Saturn from Elegoo, and get the build volume, or pay the $650 for the Frozen, tried and true brand. But again, crafter spade, deburring tool, and your snips, isopropyl, you want 99% or more for resin printing. The other thing is the wash station is going to be about $150. You can find them for 100, 150. And then this little scraper utility knife can get underneath your prints and pop them off. So last couple things, and then my presentation is just about over. You're going to get, if you have a Dremel tool, I assume you all have them. You need to get these things right here. So these little like Scotch-Brite looking balls took me forever hand sanding supports off of resin prints. It was a pain in my ass, all the different nooks and crannies and whatever. Throw this little buffer pads on your Dremel tool and just quickly go over all of them. It just knocks them all off, and it doesn't hurt, and it has some flexibility. If you push a little harder or softer, it doesn't eat into your print. So a wonderful thing to have. Costco size box of gloves, no kidding. You're going to take them on and off and waste a bunch of gloves because resin gets on everything. You don't want to touch your printer. You don't want to touch your tools if you have resin on your hands. Go to Florida Labs. Pick up IPA from Florida Labs, 99% by the gallon, and it's like the cheapest for the volume that you get. In your wash station, you might have to use like 3/4 of a gallon in your wash station. Then it evaporates over time. So something to think about, but that's the place to get it. But all in all, oh yeah, all the paper towels, like Costco in bulk, tons of paper towels, but $800 should be realistic for getting started with resin printing. So we kind of touched on everything here, the material types, the printer types, the everything to think about overall. But just kind of a little roundup here. You want to get your slicer, get your file or create your file, be able to design, have a printer that's capable of what type of plastic. Do I build something that goes around something that's hot? I need ABS. And so I need a printer that's capable of doing it. So it's kind of slicer, model, printer, and then finding best settings for what you have, and your life will be easy. So do we have any questions, or how do we do this?
You have many questions.
Okay.
You have told people that there are FF something or FDM and PLA printers, right? SLA printers. So we'll skip that question. Are there different slicers, or do you need different slicers for the different kinds of material that you're printing?
There are, but it depends. So with Prusa, their slicer can do both because they have printers themselves for resin and the FDM type. But there are slicers like Lychee Slicer and Shitu Box, which are resin only, from what I understand. Resin only. That's all I use them for is resin. And then Form Labs, they have, this is more industrial. I don't expect anybody to buy these, but if you have the money to buy that and you just want to show off, then that's by all means, you can do that. They do resin and SLS nylon powder, but their software does both.
Okay. So here's an important question. I use the Lychee Slicer and the Shitu Box as my slicers, and notice that there are some added or different functionality between them. Is there one that is robust or use more than the other?
I use Shitu Box myself, and it does what I need. And so what I would say is if you've used both of them, look at the things that you design, look at the machines you have, and just pick whichever one has the most relevant settings for you.
Okay. Then on to the FDM printers. Any insight on a heated bed or not?
Yeah, so mostly heated bed. There's only like a few types of filaments that might not use a heated bed, or certain processes that you might not use a heated bed for. But heated bed is important for any plastic we talked about today. You need heated bed. But the chamber is what I think would be more important, enclosed or not enclosed, so you can print more warping plastics easier.
And how about flex plates?
Yeah, 100%. I should have had that. I'm glad whoever asked that question. Thank you. I have a big old scar on my palm of my hand or pad of my hand because I wasn't using a flex plate, and after I sliced my hand open, I 100% flex plates on everything, including my resin printers.
That was the real question: is how about resin printers?
Yeah, so you can do flex plates on resin printers. Wham Bam has some resin settings, or resin kits to put like a magnetic 3M sheet and then a flex plate. The only thing is every once in a while, if you want to print direct to the plate, if you have a bunch of parts on it, they can actually pull the resin plate up and it slides or can shift. And I've had that happen in the past. So yes, use them, but in my presentation there was like that window scraper with, oh my gosh, I didn't know about that until I went to work for the VA and I found out they were using it for their resin printers. And I don't need the flex plate so much, but there's always that danger that I'm very careful. These, get starry hands over here. But if you use that, then the flex plate is not necessary.
So can you quickly explain what the flex plates are?
Yes, so it's a spring steel sheet. Might be coated, might not be, might be laser etched, but basically on your printer, the print sticks either top down for resin printing or bottom up for FDM printing. But when your print's done, you pull the sheet, and I have them like right over there, but you can bend. So basically, like if I have the sheet of paper, I have this thing, pop it, and then the print pops off. It peels rather than having to get something underneath the edge. Like if you're printing on glass, which is a lot of printers come with that still, you have to overcome that adhesion to the glass.
Okay, when creating my 3D prints for my scale details, when creating my 3D prints, scale details matter. I have a 4K and 8K printer. What resin should I use for the highest detail that isn't too brittle?
Okay, so something I could have put in here too, and I was contemplating. I would say use an engineering resin, but it's not the resin as much on the scale being correct as it is the translucency of the resin. So light bleeds. So if you have a clear resin, your settings to dial them in, there might be more light bleed than if you're using a colored resin because it will block a fair amount of that. So that's most important. But if you can use something like a Soraya Blue, they have a Soraya Blue clear. It's confusing. Blue is the product type. Clear is the color. But it's a tough engineering resin, and they sell UV dyes that you can buy for cheap. And you can dye to add a color to it to block, but also give you maybe a base. Like I need a certain color, like brown for a wooden bridge or something, or a dock. And you can make it brown. And so less light goes through, you have better tolerances, and then dialing in the light settings is going to help too.
Okay, so last question.
Okay.
I buy the printer. It shows up in a box.
Yes.
Black Friday sale. By
Perfect time to buy them.
Christmas, I have it almost unboxed. By New Year, it comes out of the box. By Valentine's Day, I go, what shall I print?
Let's go. Yeah, all right.
So what should I print first when I take the printer out of the box?
I think something fun. Something that you want to exist that doesn't exist because you're going to have the most motivation for actually doing the project. So I would say pick something that matters to you, is meaningful, that you've always wished you could play with or hold, or something from a show, like a replica of something, or something for your module or layout. Start there. And then as your prints fail, because they will fail, because you have to learn is there a learning curve to this? Start looking up reasons why. And slice orientation and all these things matter. And I'll be trying to do more on my YouTube channel about orientation of slicers and all these questions that you guys have. Hey, I've got the printer, now what? But I would say just something fun, something enjoyable. Printing can be frustrating, like any tool, if it doesn't function right, and it could be typically user error. But as you learn, it gets easier and more fun.
Cool. Thank you, Logan.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I think that will help a lot of people get to the basics before the basics.
Yeah.
To be a lot less stressed about the whole world of 3D printing, because it is another hobby within the hobby.
For sure.
And if Martin comes on, we can talk about rabbit holes. So thank you very, very much.
I appreciate it.
We will see everybody again. Oops, what did the where the next sheet go? It will be June the 29th. Will be the 4th Saturday. There's Martin. Martin, tell us, have you had
But
a
I
3D
heard
printer rabbit hole yet?
well, I did. I bought a 3D printer about 8-9 years ago, and I think I printed 3 things with it, and it's gathered dust in the corner of the train room since then. So
There you go. So you felt when I had my story about meeting people that they bought the printer and it just ended up on the sidelines for a year or two or more.
well, I figured once I got hold of the printer, I realised you've got to do some design. So we've got to go down the rabbit hole now of design software and learning how to use that software and all that. And you know, I'm known as Squirrel down here, and something else shiny ran past me, and that was it. I was off down another rabbit hole, and that one got left behind. So
Well, yeah, the cool thing these days, the repositories are getting bigger and bigger, and there's a land grab right now from all the vendors to
yep.
get more people sharing more files so people will buy their printers. So
Okay.
we're getting more stuff every day.
In the beginning, people always complained about how long it takes. It takes
This is
8
true.
hours to print, and I was like, what about the 80 hours you spent making it, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the other thing people don't think about. What if I need to buy something that's custom made from a vendor? How long is that going to take? What if I need to buy something that's on back order for 2 weeks? What if I need to buy something that's going to take 3-day shipping or 5-day ground shipping? So when you think about it from that perspective, 8, 16, 24 hours. I have a friend that just got into printing. He was complaining. I'm like, but think about it. If you went and ordered that part, this print will still beat that part.
Yes.
So it depends, right? It depends.
Cool. Thank you, guys. See you on the 29th.
Hey, all right. See ya. Thanks for having me.